Well, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us. LATAM Startup Ecosystem, Perspectives on Funding and Exits. So we come from two very interesting years. 2021, it seemed that money was flowing everywhere, right? Startups could find money at every turn, and everybody was incredibly excited. Come 2022, it was like everything was put to a halt. And now we're here in 2023, and things are starting to move again and change. So, finding ourselves where we are, Matias, I would want to start off a little bit more macro and then go micro. What do you see for this startup ecosystem globally, for LATAM, and finally, let's hone in on Central America?
Hi everyone. I think the big trend globally, it's that every region of the world, despite the fact that some people are killing globalization, actually what's happening is that every region of the world is becoming very, very specialized in different things. And to me, that's the biggest opportunity, to having a lot of clarity in understanding each region, what is it really good for, and then kind of going at it really, really strong. So that kind of answers like the macro view of, from my point of view.
Can you share with us a little bit of, what do you see LATAM being good at? What do you see maybe Asia being good at, so that people get a little bit of a sense of that?
Right, so I'm not gonna go into the China thing yet, but so I think LATAM, historically, LATAM, starting from Argentina in the late 90s, became a very important place for software development and design. That trickled into Brazil and then into Venezuela, actually, in the 90s. Venezuela was #1 in the late 90s. People don't remember this, but it was incredible. And then Mexico and other countries, Colombia, et cetera, kind of became up to date on the opportunity of developing software. And then this whole wave of contact centers and call centers came in using a lot of technology, and that became like a massive, massive industry. I think that in terms of the future, it's always tricky to talk about the future, because you can't really base it on the past. So typically what happens is that most people like to evaluate what transpired in the last decade, and then based on that, maybe I'll do something. What really, really happens is that these macro trends that are happening in developed economies, China, Europe, the US, drive change in different regions. So if tomorrow, for example, or today, EVs are the thing, all of a sudden, in Chile, in South America, now there are some companies doing something relatively to that industry. So when it comes to LATAM has shown the ability to shift from industry to industry very quickly. And as a result, some of these countries have developed certain skills. So if you look very closely in Latin America, Mexico, for instance, has developed certain skills, and Brazil, other skills, and Argentina, other skills. And so it's very important to pay attention to what each country specifically is getting good at, so to get the most out of it.
Excellent. And for Central America in particular, where do you see that opportunity?
So I'm a Central American, obviously, and I love Central America, and I'm bullish in Central America. I think that the geographic location is spectacular, the weather is spectacular, people are spectacular, everything is good. We have some issues with some of the governments. That's always been the case, but governments have never been actually the showstoppers of a good business. In my experience, in 25 years building technology companies specifically, it doesn't matter which government a country has, that it can excel. And there's many, many examples of this. And so I think that in Central America it's a little bit more of the same, of really understanding what transpired the last 20 years. Like what happened in the last 20 years that trained certain people for certain things that will make it easier to transition from what they've done in the last 10 years to what they should be doing in the next 10 years based on these macro trends that are happening in developed economies. So I think Central America, right now, if you look at the map world, very central to nearshoring, great time zone difference, short flights. It's a pain in the neck going to China. I've done it 100 times and it's like a pain in the neck. And so it has all these benefits, but for some reason that it's developing, there's still an opportunity for an organized industrialization of the region to serve the market. It's very isolated right now. So I think the future is this kind of like everything coming together and a more industrial big play as a region instead of like just like little pockets.
Thank you. Alfredo, we'd love to hear your opinion. Same. Global, LATAM, Central America.
I mean, I want to take a step back and thank you, Matias, for joining this panel. I mean, first of all, I want to congratulate the founders of Volcano Summit. Quick round of applause. I mean, I think these are the type of events that are transformational to the region. For us, you would think, what is a private banker doing in an innovation summit? And if you think about it, our founders were entrepreneurs as well. And when the US got industrialized, the Morgans, the Rockefellers were behind the industrialization of the US. So we've done it before. Why not do it in Latin America? And we started doing it in Mexico, we started doing it in Argentina, a couple decades ago, did it in Brazil. We're doing it in Colombia. We now have to do it in Central America as well. So about 3 years ago, we said, how do we make this happen? And it's thinking long term. And long term for us is not 3-5 years. It's 50 years ahead. And it takes a lot of vision, not just from us as, let's say, the leaders in the industry, in the region. It's at a bigger scale as a firm. We need the investment. And that investment needs to take us 50 years from here. How do we do it? We need to focus in building a new economy, being part of that new economy. And that new economy in Central America, in Latin America, in the world, is tech. And nobody can say, the opposite. It is transformational. So it's happening. And the simple fact that you're here, you're part of it already. So we wanted to be part of it. And, through a tech council where we have to basically integrate ourselves as a firm from being just private bankers to being just bankers in general. Bring investment banking, bring corporate banking, bring private banking, and try to bring our thoughts, our experience to startups like yourselves. And start from the beginning, start from the get-go, build a new economy, being part of it. And that's pretty exciting because it takes our job where, we're part of the traditional economy, if you want to call it that at the end of the day, we're building something new as well. And for us personally, for me individually, it's exciting. It brings, myself to, a new industry that I knew nothing about. And the last 3 years have been transformational for me, for my career, in terms of just learning about you guys, the way you think and understanding how can we be of value. And being of value is not just being bankers. Sometimes, we feel like, we're just a sounding board. And is it a business? Probably not initially. Long term, I'm sure it will be.
Absolutely. And so all of these startups, what do they need, right? One of the first things they're going to need is capital. So for me, the question to Matias is, what makes you sign that first check? What makes Matias, who sees 1,000 companies a year, people asking for money, and say, okay, I'm gonna not open a checkbook because that's too old, that's not techie enough. But what makes you hit send on that wire?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So unfortunately, we passed on many companies actually that we should have written the check. So I'm not like the best person to tell you like I'm always right, obviously. We were offered to invest in the Series A for YouTube. We passed because we thought it was a scam, stealing videos back then from MTV, which they were doing. Then we were offered like a first check in Uber, also a seed round, and then Series A we passed because I didn't like the vibe of like, going out of JFK and these people offering you dark taxis. And I'm like, no, I don't want to invest in that. And we passed. So just to set the stage, right? So based on those experiences, we actually realized over the years that the success of any company, it's not really what they start with. It's the core team and the ability to navigate and change really fast and make a lot of mistakes, but very small. And I know it sounds very obvious, but when you find a company, especially the ones that receive a lot of capital, now they have the pressure to perform. And with that pressure comes bigger mistakes. And sometimes actually very few mistakes, but very big. And then you're done. So by now we've had a track record of a couple decades in this industry, and we've noticed some trends. And the first trend is the size of the market. And I've learned that the hard way, unfortunately. And now we're making a better job at it. You can't sell $100 in a market of $10. That's impossible. So the real understanding of the market, the real addressable market, and then on this point, very quickly, there's a lot of reports like McKinsey and all these companies. They create lots and lots of reports, addressable market. You can download from the local government agencies the size of markets. But none of those reports actually compare to the revenue of your competitor. So for instance, if you want to sell electric vehicles today, your market is actually Tesla's revenue. That's the market. It's not whatever fuzzy number that it's being published in a report. It's your competitor's revenue, that's your market that you go after. So when we try to make a decision to sign a check, we focus on, is the core team really understanding what their true addressable market is by understanding the revenue of a company that they will take the revenue from. And once we find that team, which is very rare, by the way, very rare. People talk about going into the market and but actually, when somebody describes to me, here's how I'm gonna take $20 million a year from Expedia, and they're very detailed about it, that's exciting, and that's what usually gets us to write the check.
Excellent.
Got the rain and the sun, that's pretty cool.
So, Alfredo, in that same line, what would you say to somebody, when should they come to you? When should somebody come to you? Is it when, because with Matias, I would say it's more seed funding. We're starting off with an idea, a core team. So should they come to you after they've gone to the VC fund? Should they come to you when they're at Series A or at Series B?
Right.
When is that good contact to be done?
I mean, here's the thing. I think over especially the last 12, 18 months, the industry has changed tremendously, especially in Latin America, where, you were saying it initially, we were having lunch and it was basically free money over the last, through 21, late 20, throughout 21. And we forgot about the fundamentals of business. And I think now our job, especially at the very beginning of the startups, is helping them build sustainable business models. And what I mean by this is, it's not boring business models, it's business models that can make profit and make that profit scalable and sustainable. That's what investors are looking now. I think capital, you still have probably even more capital than in 21 at a different cost. And the questions they're gonna ask is back to business basics. But the excitement around that transformation in the industry is still there. So when we get into that initial conversation, and I think over the last 3 years, we've met companies that, we're probably 6 months into their startup, and I've met companies that were into their, 7th year, round C, but they still didn't know how to make it bigger. And by bigger, I don't mean their business model. How do we get out of Central America? How do we bring investors, institutional investors, that are gonna look at Central America not as a risky place to do business, but more as a place where there's untapped opportunities that the world hasn't seen yet. You've seen it in Mexico, you've seen it in Brazil, you've seen it in Argentina, but you haven't seen it in Central America yet, and there's so much going on. Conversations I had this morning, gets me excited because there's a lot going on, there's a lot being built. So when we had that initial reach out from startup, first, I want to get to know them. I want to get to know how they think. Where do we want to take their business? Not in the next 12 months. Where do we take this in the next 5 years? How do we transform your business from being, a local business in El Salvador? I'm from El Salvador, by the way, so I'm even more excited about what's happening here. But make it from Guatemala, from Costa Rica to, the US, Europe, Asia. There's so much untapped opportunity here. And again, as I said initially, the simple fact that you are sitting here is because you believe in that opportunity. So we want to be enablers. That's what I like to call ourselves, as how can we enable bringing the international, complex, institutional financial markets to this, very niche market with untapped opportunities. And I think that's where we start. I think when it comes to raising, your round A, your round B, it's going to get to a point where we also have minimums to meet as investment bankers. And we're going to have that conversation eventually. But if we can help you from the beginning, and again, it's not going to be a business partnership, it's just helping out. That's our 2 cents to the region. That's what, when as a firm, we committed to doing this long term, that's what it takes. Thinking 50 years ahead and starting from the very beginning.
It would be great if you could share an example, because I know we have a few that we started from, they were in a garage.
Yeah.
And how we went through those different stages.
I can talk about, a particular example. I don't want to mention the name, but, Argentina, 20 years ago, we met this guy, a couple guys operating out of a garage, but that had ideas that were gonna, basically take Argentina to the international markets. Whether it was gonna be, in years or in a decade, we didn't know. But they had a sustainable business model. And not just that, I think they had the guts. And I always say, without guts, there's no glory. And that goes both ways. We as a firm, we need the guts. We're a mammoth corporation firm that we need to view risk from a different level, but we need to put our money where our mouth is as well. And we help them from that very beginning, helping them with, lending at one point, corporate solutions, all the way through taking them to, one of the first unicorns in Latin America. And when I see what we've done over the last decade in Mexico, in Brazil, in Argentina, easily more than 50% of the unicorn IPOs, we've been part of it. Whether as a leading investment banker or, sharing the deal, but we've been part of it, and that's what we want.
Thank you. So, Matias, any words of wisdom for those who are with startups today, out there looking for capital to grow? I mean, the world has changed, right? We're in a high rate environment.
A lot has changed.
Exactly. Capital has a lot of different places where it can go now. So anything you would want to share with this group, or even people that want to put capital to work, what should they be looking? What opportunities do you see as the right ones for, call it, the next decade?
Okay. So I think that in any industry that you're going into, there's something very interesting that happened in the last few years. And that's that you need less to do more. And that is just compounding. And so I think that if you're in a very early stage today, you gotta find a way to stay very, very small. And if you outgrew yourself too much, go back to small. Because what we're seeing is that the biggest winners, the companies that scale the fastest, are the ones that have been able to sustain that small environment for a very long time, and then get to scale when you have your fundamentals very, very solid. So in an early stage, my biggest recommendation would be to stay small. That also has the benefit, obviously, of low burn. You need a smaller check, you protect your cap table even further. So there's all these benefits, and you get to make smaller mistakes. So the biggest, some people come to me and they're like, oh, Matias, you've done many startups, like, how do you do it? Like, teach me. And I'm like, like that's very, very hard to teach because you gotta walk the walk. But one thing that I've learned over my career, like 25 years now, building startups, is the ability to stay very, very frugal. What I've seen in most, and we don't get to see it that much, but like Google, all these massive platforms, if you go back to the early days when they were very, very small, they were this frugal. This is where the success actually comes from. And so it's been very, and if you were interviewing me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I wouldn't be this clear, but now I'm very clear about this. And I could almost predict the success of a company of how frugal they've been from the beginning. It's a very interesting indication of success. And so it's very exciting to find an early stage startup that has the ability to prove progress and execution with very, very small, because there's a team that you're gonna give them $1, for example, and that dollar is gonna explode in a good way, not in a bad way. So that's on the early stage front. From my entrepreneur hat. From an investor, if I take my hat and I put on an investor hat, I think investors should open up to the fact that you can't control everything. That I've learned also the hard way. And I think that every time that actually with my partners, like when we invest and we reach a point where we're in control, we're like, oh man, we're screwed. Because control in the venture world, in the investment world, actually means that now you own the situation, and now you got to execute yourself if you want to keep it. So instead of trying to go for control, try to go for something more exciting, which is build a massive, massive platform with the right partners. And ironically, I mean, at least in my case, what I've seen in the past couple decades is that investors that were very clear intentionally in this vision of, get in, but make sure that others get in with you that are very strategic and build a platform and have no control. If you're with the right people, then most likely your probability of success has increased very significantly. So as an investor, control equals potentially failure. Non-control equals potential success if you're with the right people. And as far as capital, the price of capital right now is very, very hard to price because you got all these treasury notes paying crazy yields and all these banks trying to paying lots of higher interest rates, and so there's a lot of competition for that capital. So now you're with your little startup saying, hey, I can perform better than the bank, and you got nothing. You just got an idea, you got a team, and you got to show that. So going back to my entrepreneur hat and building a company, I would highly recommend that you find a way to structure your financing the simplest way possible, like going back to basics with a basic convertible note, with the basic, just very, very simple terms that are friendly both for the investors and for you, because ultimately everyone is getting into risk. But the simplicity actually, it's gonna get you more traction with any investor. So I can go into a lot of details, but I don't want to talk too much. So, okay.
Well, you're going to have to talk a little bit more because I think
Okay.
we're coming towards the end, and I want to ask you,
Yeah.
what excites you right now? Like, what is that thing that gets you up in the morning and you see for the future?
My
that
3
says-
girls. What's sexy? You mean like for exciting?
Yeah. What's exciting? What do you see that is happening now?
As a category, industry.
Yeah. Because first, I remember us talking in 21, and the concern around how much capital was out there, right? And that people weren't being very smart about it, and then a lot of investments were being done, and then there was not a lot of thought. And then I feel like 2022 was the time to stop. And then people have thought a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes you excited? What keeps you?
Many things. I think we're in the best year ever to build something, actually. Here's why. I am very excited. I'm very passionate about what I do. I've been in 3 crises by now in my life. 2000, .com bust, and 2001 was terrible. That's when I got started, and many of my friends got started. 2008 was horrible. 2009, 8, 9. And then, the last couple of years that we just went by. And when I reflect and I look back to the 2 previous crises, and I think of the pressure that put on so many of us, and it created the most spectacular companies when you look back. So I'm very bullish about this new crisis, because I know for a fact that spectacular companies are gonna, take place and start from this crisis. Crisis forces you to innovate for real. It forces you to find a way and get the most out of that last dollar that you have. And so, the saying of like pressure makes the diamond is so real, because it really does, and so that's kind of like the macro of what I'm excited about, because I believe that we're in a very, very interesting year as far as being in a crisis, but for the first time we're in a crisis where everyone is connected, where information is flowing as fast as ever, and when we're starting a new company, regardless if it's industrial or software or fintech or whatever, it's somehow easier because you have access to so many tools. So combining the pressure of the crisis with all of us being connected and all these tools, then there's the magic is starting to happen. And I'm actually starting to see some companies that are creating certain things that are just incredible, both on the industrial side and on the software side. And so what has me really excited, there's a couple of ways to look at it, but like the main way is if you go back in time, if you go 150 years ago, and I will show up on a horse with a wagon behind me, you'll be like, oh, what's that? And I'm like, it's a wagon. And then, 50 years later, I'll show up with a train, and I'll say that I was a train driver, and you'll be like, holy crap, what's that? That's a train, And so the rock star in the room was a guy driving the train. And then planes came, and then software came, and hardware came, and then software came, and the understanding of lots of scientific things came to exist. And so now, today, like this year, it's a moment where, for the first time in mankind, everyone has access to very critical information, like very, very critical. And the winners will be the ones that execute. And that's why I'm, so admiring so much like certain locations in the world, like, China, despite the fact, it's been so criticized, they just woke up and did the work. And so ultimately, who's gonna win today is the ones that actually wake up and do the work. Israel is another great example. I mean, so many locations, Estonia, etc. And so it really, the environment, the government, your everything around you, it doesn't really play against you anymore. It's just a matter of like really, putting all the pieces together and doing something special. And as for categories and industries, what has me really excited is biotech. I think the next 10 biggest companies in the world, if we are all surprised with Apple at $1 trillion or whatever, $3 trillion now, and Nvidia with $1 trillion and this with another $1 trillion, I think there's gonna be $10 trillion companies in biotech. That's a category that I believe it's incredible. Because of finally the understanding of science and the human body, because of all the data and the computing power to understand it. So that's super exciting. And then on the industrial side, basically, in just 10 more seconds, the industrial revolution that is taking place in terms of reinventing every single industrial process. So from cement to steel to what have you, like any industry, basically. There's a new scientific approach that is a combination of hardware and software that it's gonna basically reinvent every single factory on the planet. And whoever is capable of integrating the source material with that new industrial factory will have a real competitive advantage. So that's also super exciting. So biotech and industrial revolution, that's...
Thank you very much, Matias. Thank you very much, Alfredo, and thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.